In 1957, I was part of a group of Americans and worked as the director of the Petroleum Engineering Laboratory for the Mini Grande Oil Company in the state of Anzoategui in eastern Venezuela. My friend and laboratory colleague Rudy Tayer encouraged me to join the Rotary Club of El Tigre to meet and feel the pulse of the local people. For me, it was a rewarding experience. Solid friendships were established with many Venezuelans that lasted a lifetime. These were exceptionally fine people, people like Dr. Vicente Gonzalez Orsini, Dr. Tulio Briceño Mas, Don Pedro Elias Chaucin, Dr. Fritz Peterson, and Juan Enet. There was much political unrest as the Venezuelan people struggled to oust the dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez and achieve a democratically elected form of government. The following year, the dictator was overthrown and the government replaced by elected representatives. Dr. Tulio Briceño was the chief of the medical staff of the San Tome Hospital. Like most of the doctors, he was a graduate of the Universidad Central de Caracas. He was a good doctor and a fine administrator. He was also one of the founders of the Rotary Club of El Tigre. It was largely through his personal efforts that the Rotary Club of El Tigre was chartered in 1953. He was elected the first president of the club and later served as Rotary governor for Rotary District 435. My acquaintanceship and friendship with Dr. Vicente Gonzalez Orsini began shortly after I joined the Rotary Club in 1957. He was the owner and chief executive officer of the Orsini Clinic. He was also a rancher, physician, patron, and benefactor to the poor people of El Tigre. We shared a deep interest and appreciation of the flora and fauna of Venezuela. We spent long hours discussing cattle, exotic grasses, trees, fish, and other wildlife in Venezuela. One evening I asked, "Doc, how did you happen to settle in the boom town of El Tigre?" He replied, "I came for a short visit. However, I ran up so many tabs in the local bars I had to establish a practice here to pay off my debts." This was a basic trait of Dr. Orsini. He lived life to its fullest. He took a lot, but he gave a lot in return. One of the classic stories about Doc Orsini goes back to the early 50s when he returned to Corsica and looked up some relatives. The Orsini family reportedly came from royalty. After his arrival in Corsica, he contacted the Count de Orsini and made an appointment to meet him at a certain hour. Doc was there on time and ushered into the mansion of the Count. He had pretty well sized up the Count through earlier telephone conversation and had him mentally classified as a stuffed shirt and an overbearing, pompous jackass. Everything fell into place during the conversation exactly as Doc had it figured. After expounding upon his wealth and the values of his branch of the family, the Count elaborated. He explained that there were two branches of the Orsini family. First, there was his family branch, and then there was the family of El Loco Orsini. The implication was that Doc's family came down through the crazy Orsini side of the family. About that time, Dr. Orsini looked at his watch and said, 3 o'clock. My driver will pick me up in a few minutes." The Count then showed Doc to the front porch. The driver arrived on schedule, driving two beautiful white horses, pulling a magnificent carriage. Doc climbed aboard the rented rig, tipped his Stetson hat, and bid adios to the Count. Doc Orsini shook with laughter when he told me the story, saying, "As I departed, I looked back and saw this nincompoop making circles with his forefinger near his head, as he explained to his butler I was definitely a member of the crazy Orsini family." In 1985, my wife and I made a trip to Venezuela to attend a Rotary conference in Caracas. Doc Orsini met us there and invited us to spend a week at his beautiful ranch west of El Tigre. After more than 25 years, I thought I knew the man, but I learned a lot from that visit. I was able to spend several days with him as he went through his daily routines. First thing in the morning, he loaded 2 daughters of hired hands into his pickup and carried them 12 miles into town. On the way, he made a brief stop at a bodequin for a cafecito and an empanada de cazón. I had never tasted an empanada made with shark meat, but it was very good. About 7 o'clock, he dropped off the girls at the home of a friend, where they stayed until school opened an hour later. The next stop was his clinic, where he spent 15 or 20 minutes attending to business details. And then it was off to the open market, where he purchased food for the household and held his daily court with the people he loved. He approached a woman on crutches and said, "Hola Maria, ¿cómo está la pierna?" The elderly woman slapped the cast on her broken leg, replying, "Everything is fine. The cast comes off tomorrow." The next patient was a woman whose prescription medicine had run out. Doc took time to write out a new prescription and gave her money to pay for it at the pharmacist. By the time Doc had completed his shopping, he usually attended to 5 or 6 people in a friendly and compassionate manner. Most of the shopping and doctoring was out of the way by 10 o'clock. While I was with him, we spent the next 2 hours visiting old friends and renewing mutual acquaintanceships. At noon, the 2 young girls were gathered up for the return trip to the ranch. After lunch and a siesta, it was time to check the cattle and attend to ranch business. After that, it was time to retire to the bar for a relaxing drink. I learned a lot from Dr. Vicente Gonzalez Orsini. He didn't have much interest in most Americans, not because of their origin. Most Americans did not share his diverse interests. Dr. Orsini was many things. He was a fine doctor, an idealist with an artistic temperament. He was also an environmentalist, progressive rancher, a patriotic Venezuelan, and a humanist. In our pathway through life, we meet a few people who have a profound influence upon our lives. I am proud to say Dr. Vicente Gonzalez Orsini was such a person, and that he was my friend. Don Pedro Elias Chacin was born in the town of Clarinas on the Unari River. He was the head of the land department for the Many Grande Oil Company. He was not a fisherman and had never enjoyed the fabulous fishing in the area of his birthplace. On several occasions I tried to take my friend and Rotary companion on a trip to the Unari River. Don Pedro could always find an excuse. "No, Jake, my asthma is acting up," or "I can't go because I have to close a land transaction in La Vieja." On one occasion I nailed him. He couldn't come up with a valid excuse. As a result, we spent a fabulous weekend fishing for tarpon and robalo, or snook, about 15 miles north of Clarinas. Don Pedro was hooked. He became an avid aficionado de la pesca and ultimately one of the most ardent sports fishermen in the camp of San Tome. Fritz Peterson was a surgeon. He wasn't just a run-of-the-mill surgeon. His peers told me he was a world-class surgeon. As the name suggests, Fritz was of European background, but he was all Venezuelan. He graduated from the Universidad Central de Caracas Medical School, and after joining the Mini Grande Oil Company, he spent considerable time training and practicing surgery in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before settling in San Tomé. In 1970, I had an attack of appendicitis. Fritz came by my room in the hospital and told me an operation was necessary. My confidence in the man was unbounded. I told him to proceed when he was ready. About 3 hours later, I regained consciousness and learned that Fritz had had a rough time with me. My retrocecal appendix had been wrapped around the caecum and was extremely difficult to remove. However, Fritz Peterson handled the job with skill and class. Fritz had one shortcoming. He was a chain smoker and succumbed to lung cancer at an early age. The ideals of Rotary Club may be summarized in the words truthfulness, fairness, friendship, goodwill, and benefits to mankind. In almost 40 years as a member of the Rotary Club, I never met a person who believed more strongly in these ideals or worked harder within the club to promote them. Juan Ennett was the most dedicated Rotarian I ever knew. As an accountant, Juan was precise. He did things in a neat and orderly manner. After serving a term as president of the Rotary Club of Anzoategui, Juan initiated a weekly newsletter called Ideales, or Ideals. He faithfully reported activities of the board of directors and the membership, and kept records detailing membership attendance and other activities of the club. The pictures and quotations in this account were taken from Juan's fine booklet titled Ideales of Rotary, in which he summarizes projects achieved during the first 10 years of the Rotary Club of Anzoategui. 12 rural schools for the Rotary Club of Anzoategui. In 1962, I was elected and served as the first North American president of the Rotary Club of Anzoategui. It was quite an honor and an awesome challenge. My first problem was learning how to control the political fervor of my associates. There was no way their first gringo president could become even remotely involved in any sort of political activity. Proposals were often made from the floor to get the Rotary Club of Anzoategui to sponsor or approve some kind of a statewide or national movement. I learned to accept these proposals with thanks, even those that reeked of politics. However, I always caution, the proposal will have to be studied and cleared by our board of directors. Of course, I saw to it these political movements died a peaceful death in our Rotary boardroom. Each newly elected Rotary Club president was expected to have and carry out a project during the year he was in office. I decided the things needed most on the Mesa de Juanipa where we lived were rural school buildings. This decision was based upon observations I had made in my travels through the Venezuelan countryside. Although painfully slow, progress had been made by the Venezuelans in their struggles to develop a rural school system. School districts had been defined and teachers hired by the state of Anzoategui, but there were no rural school buildings. Instead, the school district paid a local farmer or campesino approximately 100 bolivars monthly, about $30 in 1962, to use his home as a classroom. There were no desks, blackboards, or other teaching aids. Each student was required to supply his or her stool. At the end of each session, these were neatly stacked in the corner of the room. 3 previous Rotary Club presidents had installed schools, but mistakes were made. Dr. Fritz Peterson installed a fine building in an Indian settlement along the Juanipa River, but there was no established school district for that area. It took more than 10 years for the local politicians to act. By the time the school district was founded and a teacher hired, the building was in a bad state of repair. The other 2 schools were installed in the towns of El Tigre and San Jose de Juanipa, commonly known as El Tigrito. The big mistake made in these installations involved failure of the Rotary Club to formally turn over the building and all facilities to the state. Every time a window was knocked out or the roof leaked, Rotary was expected to make the repairs. I searched for a way to avoid these problems. In 1962, Grande had a number of surplus temporary housing units. These were steel Armaco buildings 15 feet by 30 feet. I contacted management and told them I wanted a dozen to convert into rural school buildings. This was to be my project for the Rotary year of 1962 and 63. The company manager wasn't entirely against me, but suggested we start with one building and see how things worked out. Marcel Bialy, a Rotarian and manager of a general contracting company in El Tigrito, helped with the basic design of the school interior. This design called for 7 tables and attached bench seats down each side of the building. Used sucker rods were bent to provide support for the combination bench-table units. This provided a seating capacity for 50 to 60 students. Of course, a fine blackboard covered the wall behind the teacher's desk and chair, provided by Grande from used warehouse surplus. One building was moved into the patio of Marcel Bialy's workshop in the town of El Tigrito. A sign was erected which merely stated, "Rotary constructs rural schools." The sign also listed the names and people and companies who contributed to the project. I didn't ask these people for money. I asked them to supply materials needed to convert the building to a schoolroom. One company supplied the white paint, another the aluminum paint, another the glass window panes, another wood for the tables, benches, and so forth. The work was carried out adjacent to the highway where everyone could see the progress. We never made any inquiries regarding a place to locate the school building, but the word got around. Soon I received comisiones of campesinos representing a school district in my office in San Tomé. The campesinos were always clean and dressed in their Sunday best. When they asked about the Rotary School, I assured them that we were indeed building a rural school. But there were condiciones. Before we could install a school, the campesinos in the area would have to agree to our conditions, and these were: first, they had to have an established school district with a teacher paid by the state of Anzoategui. Second, people of the area would have to supply the land, about 25 by 25 meters, since Rotary had no money to buy property. Third, the people would have to cut 64 alcornoco trees to be used as fence posts, and strip the trees of branches and bark. They would then dig 64 holes and set the posts for the fence. Rotary would supply cement for the corner and gate posts, plus the front gate and hinges, barbed wire, staples, and aluminum paint for all the posts. People of the area would be required to supply sand, gravel, water, mixed concrete for the corner and gate posts, and install the barbed wire, since Rotary had no money for such labor. Fourth, the people of the area would prepare the sub-base foundation for the building, a hole about 8 inches deep by about 14 feet wide, and be there on a Saturday morning to assist in the final installation of the school building, since Rotary had no money for casual labor. Fifth, the people of the area were then to take possession of the school and care for it. As I put it, if some Indio Bravo throws a rock through the window, you will have to replace it because Rotary has no money to replace broken windows. These poor people certainly understood not having any money. When they agreed to our terms, final arrangements were made. The campesinos were alerted, and we loaded the school on a Big Mac oil-filled truck. The first Rotary school was installed about 20 miles south of San Tomé near Joe Segui's chicken farm at a site called Los Caños del Cares. The building was on location by 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Everything else was in place by noon. As expected, there was some minor opposition from the person who lost the monthly rental for the use of his house as a school, but his protests were squelched by neighbors who wanted a real school building. Shortly thereafter, management offered me 11 more buildings to convert into rural schools. This was a period of surging nationalism and terrorism in Venezuela. Pipelines were blown up and tank batteries were set afire by extremists. However, the vitriolic hatred of the extremists never spread to inflame the general public. The campesinos of our region in the state of Anzoategui listened to the shouts of "Abajo los Yankee imperialistas" with stoicism. Then they would send a commission to my office and make arrangements for installing another Rotary school. No claim is made that our efforts checked the radicals or changed the political structure of Venezuela. However, there seemed to be little doubt that the positive contributions of the Rotary Club of Anzoategui provided proof to the people that progress was being made. It certainly took the sting out of many wild claims of the extremists. We faithfully followed our guidelines at each school location. It took about 4 months to get all 12 schools installed. At the end of this period, more than 500 young Venezuelans were attending classes in the 12 Rotary school buildings. The campesinos kept their word and the buildings were well cared for. But there was one problem. Each school was supplied with a flagpole, a Venezuelan flag, and a 1/4-inch rope to raise and lower the flag. The temptation was obviously too great. Young cowboys in the rural areas stole the ropes as fast as they could be installed. However, the teachers were resourceful. They found that baling twine had little attraction for the young cowboys. From then on, baling twine was used daily to raise and lower their flags. Dr. Gonzalez Orsini was a tremendous ally as I worked to put the program together. On one occasion, I complained about the slow reaction time of local politicians in awarding necessary documents to formalize a required school district. Doc Orsini laughed and said, "Amigo, let me tell you a story." The Creator was busy putting together his master plan for the universe. He pointed to a spot on the globe and said to his assistant, "This spot will be called Venezuela. It will be endowed with gold, diamonds, iron ore, aluminum, petroleum, grassy plains, dense forests, abundant animal life, plenty of rainfall, and a lovely climate. The assistant was quite surprised and said, "Aren't you overdoing it just a little?" The creator was quick to reply, "Not at all. Just wait till you see the politicians I give them." Behind the scenes, Doc Orsini then went to work in his own unobtrusive way. He made a few phone calls to political friends, and the document problem was quickly resolved. Perhaps the most impressive reaction of the people was their enthusiasm for the project. It seemed as though everyone pitched in and helped us achieve our goal of 12 rural schools installed and working. It took a little more than 4 months to do the job. I remember especially the contribution of a young teacher assigned to the last school installed. As usual, we delivered the barbed wire and the staples and the cement and the aluminum paint for the 64 fence posts of Alcornoco. But I forgot to supply 2 or 3 paintbrushes. I drove by to see how things were going. The campesinos had installed the posts and the wire and the front gate. The young schoolteacher was industriously painting the fence posts. About then I remembered the paintbrushes. But I need not have worried. The young lady found a piece of hemp rope about 1 inch in diameter. She frayed one end of the rope until it made a tolerable paintbrush. The only bothersome thing was that it splattered the paint badly. The beautiful brown face of the lovely young teacher was highlighted with aluminum paint. When I expressed concern, she said, "Don't worry, senor. The paint on my face will wipe off. Monday morning when the students arrive, we will have the most beautiful school in the country." To celebrate completion of the project, the United States Ambassador to Venezuela, C. Allen Stewart, and Cliff Perry, president of the Mini Grande Oil Company, were invited to dedication ceremonies. Edmundo Barrios was the editor of the local newspaper La Antorcha. To state it mildly, Edmundo was quite nationalistic, but he reported things as he saw them. Following the completion of the Rotary School project and the dedication ceremonies, he published this editorial in his paper. Operation Schools by Edmundo Barrios. Very well planned, as if it were a military action, 12 rural schools were installed in the state of Anzoategui. The official act of delivering these schools to the Ministry of Education took place on December 8, 1962. All the Rotarians worked in a friendly and diligent manner in this great work of vital importance. But the praises are mainly for our companion, Jake Howland, who worked indefatigably for months, shaping the plan of action and making contacts with various persons and organizations for help. No details were overlooked in bringing this program to a happy and successful completion. All of the contractors, businessmen, and in particular the Rotarians responded generously. Nevertheless, we should stress the input of the Mini Grande Oil Company and the efforts of the local manager, H.P. Weaver, and President Cliff W. Perry, who approved the donation of 12 prefabricated steel buildings to be converted to school buildings. Also mentioned in these ceremonies was the wide cooperation lent by many different contractors and friends of the Rotary Club. Thus, we now have the presence of Rotary here in the Venezuelan countryside. The Rotary emblem is mounted on each of the 12 schools and demonstrates what can be done and what ought to be done by the Rotary Club. Epilogue. The following year, management asked me to convert 2 additional surplus buildings. Thus, a total of 14 Rotary schools were actually installed on the Mesa de Guanipa in eastern Venezuela. My wife Dorothy and I returned to Venezuela in 1985. We were house guests of Dr. Vicente Gonzalez Orsini at his lovely ranch near Paraguay. One of the most gratifying rewards of our trip was to find several of the Rotary school buildings still in use after 23 years. The project was cited by District 435 of Rotary International as the most successful in the first 25 years of existence. If there is a lesson to be learned from this story, we might say the project demonstrated that not all of the Yankee imperialistas in Venezuela during the post-war years were ugly Americans.